France, the 8th of October, 1918. The Argonne Forest is a cathedral of splintered trees and suffocating mist, a place where the air itself smells of wet iron and rot. Out of the gray fog emerges a sight that defies every rule of military logic. One man is walking down a narrow trail. He is tall, lanky, and red-headed, wearing the mud-stained uniform of a corporal in the U.S. 82nd Division. Behind him, stretching back into the trees, is a column of 132 German soldiers. They are armed, they are trained, and they are very much alive. Yet, they follow this lone Tennessee farmer with the docility of a herd. No battalion surrounds them. No heavy artillery pins them down. They are following a man who, just 2 years prior, refused to even pick up a rifle. A man whose hands are still visibly shaking against the cold steel of his weapon. He had left home as a pacifist, a man of God who believed that "thou shalt not kill" was a command as literal and unyielding as gravity. He had filed for conscientious objector status 3 times, begging his government to let him stay in the mountains rather than face the mud of France. Now, he is moments away from becoming the most decorated legend of the Great War, but not for the reasons you might think. This isn't a story about a one-man army's bloodlust or a superhuman feat of strength. It is a psychological mystery. It is a story about why 132 elite soldiers, hardened by 4 years of the most brutal trench warfare in human history, looked into the eyes of this one man and decided that he was worth surrendering to. To understand the miracle that occurred on that ridge in the Argonne, we have to look past the medals and the headlines. We have to go back to the mountains of Tennessee, where Alvin York learned that in his world, missing wasn't just a failure, it was a death sentence for his family. Alvin York did not choose the life of a marksman. It was forced upon him by the rugged, unforgiving geography of the Cumberland Mountains. In Fentress County, Tennessee, the math of survival was brutal and simple. 11 children, 1 rifle, and a mother whose eyes tracked every empty plate. The rule in the York household was absolute: if you miss, the family doesn't eat. By the age of 12, Alvin had become the finest shot in the county, not through practice or hobby, but through the desperate necessity of a child who knew the weight of a hungry sibling's gaze. He could hit a moving turkey at 200 yards, a feat that felt like sorcery to outsiders but was merely Tuesday for York. He never missed twice. His hands possessed a mechanical calmness, a stillness that seemed to stop the wind and hush the forest. He was a creature of the mountains, a man who spoke the language of shadows and windage long before he ever heard the name of a foreign country. However, 2 years before the Great War reached across the Atlantic to claim him, York stepped into a revival meeting that would fundamentally rewrite his soul. He walked in a man of the earth. He walked out a man of the spirit. To Alvin, the Bible was not a book of suggestions. It was the literal architecture of reality. One commandment, in particular, burned into his mind with the heat of a branding iron: "Thou shalt not kill." York believed in that verse the same way he believed in the sunrise. He was a man transformed, trading his rough-and-tumble past for a life of quiet pacifism. He had finally found peace in the mountains, a stillness that had nothing to do with aiming a rifle. But the world outside Fentress County was screaming. In 1917, the draft letter arrived. It was a piece of paper that didn't care about his faith, his mother, or his refusal to take a life. It only cared about his hands, the hands of a killer that wanted to be anything but. The call to arms didn't arrive in Fentress County with a trumpet blast. It came as a thin, white envelope that felt heavier than the mountains themselves. In 1917, as the United States plunged into the Great War, the Selective Service Act began its slow, methodical harvest of young men. For York, that piece of paper was a direct assault on his soul. He didn't see a chance for glory or a path to heroism. He saw a violation of his sacred pact with the Creator. Alvin did something almost nobody in his county dared to do. He said no. He filed for conscientious objector status, citing the very words that had saved him from a life of brawling: "Thou shalt not kill." But the army, a machine built for the singular purpose of destruction, had no room for grace. Denied. He filed again. Denied again. The third letter wasn't a request. It was an ultimatum. York took that final letter, folded it slowly, and walked to a quiet ridge behind his house. He stood there for a long time, looking at the blue-tinted peaks of Tennessee, realizing he might never see them again. His fear wasn't of the German Mauser or the poison gas. He was terrified of the man he would become. He was afraid of sitting at his mother's table, looking at his hands, and knowing they had taken what only God has the right to give. Eventually, he reported for duty. Somewhere on the long, nauseating journey across the Atlantic, as the transport ship cut through the cold waves, York made a deal in the silence of the night. It wasn't a plea for his own life, but a bargain for his morality. He told God he would serve, he would obey, and he would go into the fire if God would just ensure he didn't have to lose himself in the process. He just wasn't sure if God was listening. France, the 8th of October, 1918. Before the first sliver of dawn can pierce the canopy, 17 shadows melt into the undergrowth of the Argonne Forest in absolute silence. Alvin York is among them. He isn't the leader today. He is just a corporal, a man following orders and trying desperately to keep the memories of Tennessee from clouding his vision. Their mission is a clinical military objective: capture the Decauville Railroad and sever the German supply lines. On paper, it is a strategic necessity. In reality, it is a journey into the mouth of a labyrinth. The patrol carries a map, their only umbilical cord to the world they know, but it contains a fatal flaw. The map is written entirely in French. Among these 17 American boys, not a single soul can read or speak a word of it. Driven by duty and the blind momentum of war, they push forward anyway, stepping deeper into a wilderness that feels increasingly sentient and hostile. They are moving further from their lines, further from the safety of the known, and into a landscape where the trees themselves seem to watch their every move. The Argonne is a different kind of monster. The trees grow thicker here, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers in the pre-dawn gloom. The reassuring rumble of their own artillery, a comfort in its own violent way, begins to fade, leaving them in a silence so heavy it rings in their ears. Then, the air changes. The scent of damp earth is suddenly cut by the sharp, acrid smell of foreign tobacco. And then, the sound. Voices. Low, guttural, and dangerously close. In their blind trek through the mist, the 17 Americans haven't just found the enemy. They have walked directly into the beating heart of a German camp. For one agonizing heartbeat, the forest holds its breath. And then, the world explodes. For one fleeting, deceptive second, it looks like a victory. The Americans open fire first, and the Germans, caught in the middle of their morning coffee and gear maintenance, scatter in a blind panic. York's patrol manages to corral a group of prisoners instantly, more than they ever expected to find this deep in the forest. But the Argonne is a cruel teacher. It waits for you to feel safe before it strikes. Just as the Americans begin to secure their captives, the hillside above them disintegrates into a wall of lead. Hidden in the dense tree line, German machine gunners have been watching from an elevated position, waiting for the perfect moment of exposure. They open up with a synchronized fury, firing down into the shallow valley where York and his men are standing in the open with their prisoners. There is no cover. There is no time to think. In the first jagged burst of fire, 6 Americans go down before they even hear the sound of the shots, dead before they hit the mud. 3 more are wounded, screaming as the bullets tear through the air. Out of 17 men, 9 are incapacitated in under 10 seconds. It is a slaughter, not a battle. York looks around, his eyes searching for the chain of command that has guided his life since he put on the uniform. But the chain is broken. The sergeant is dead. The other sergeant is dead. The corporal is bleeding out in the dirt. Every single man above Alvin York in rank is either gone or dying. The machine guns are still screaming, the bullets chewing through the trees and the bodies of his friends. Suddenly, the pacifist farmer from Tennessee, the man who begged God and his country not to be here, is the only man left standing to give an order. In the vacuum of leadership, Alvin York doesn't freeze. He doesn't panic. And, perhaps most surprisingly for a man of his deep faith, he doesn't stop to pray. There is no time for the luxury of a spiritual debate or the paralyzing weight of the deal he made on the transport ship. There is only the mud of the Argonne, the screaming of the Maxim machine guns above him, and the 8 surviving men behind him who are looking at him with wide, terrified eyes, waiting for a miracle or a command. York takes command the only way a man from Fentress County knows how, not with a military plan, but with pure ancestral instinct. He orders the survivors to hold the prisoners they've already captured and to stay down, flat against the earth. He realizes that if they all charge, they all die. If they retreat, they are cut down from behind. The only way out is through the source of the fire. He turns toward the hill, toward the muzzle flashes and the thing that just slaughtered his friends, and he starts to move. But he doesn't charge in the way Hollywood would later depict it. He doesn't scream a battle cry or run blindly into the lead. York moves the way he moves through the Tennessee brush before dawn. Low, slow, and terrifyingly deliberate. He utilizes every shadow, every fold in the wet earth, and every splintered stump as if he were stalking a prize buck in the mountains. His body is now performing a sequence of actions his mind hasn't had to consciously process in years. He has done this 10,000 times before, just not in France. He is back in the quiet woods of home, where the silence is a weapon and missing meant his family went hungry. The German gunners on the ridge are looking for a frantic American retreat. They are not prepared for a ghost rising through the mist, moving with the cold, calculated patience of a man who has never missed twice. To understand what happened next, you have to understand the mind of a Fentress County turkey hunter. Wild turkeys are not the foolish birds most people imagine. They are fast, alert, and intensely communicative. If you are stalking a flock, and you make the amateur mistake of shooting the lead bird first, the rest of the flock scatters in a heartbeat. You get one bird, and the rest vanish into the brush. You walk home with an empty bag. But Alvin York had been hunting these birds since he was 8 years old. He knew the secret. You never shoot the bird at the front. You start from the back. You take the last bird in the line. It drops silently. And the birds in front, blind to what is happening behind them, keep moving forward, unaware that their numbers are dwindling. You work your way forward, one by one, methodical and invisible. By the time the lead bird realizes something is wrong, there is no one left to warn him. York applied this exact, cold-blooded logic to the German machine gun positions on the ridge. He positioned himself at an angle where he could see the flank of the gunners, but the thick Argonne undergrowth obscured their view of him. Then, he began the count. One shot, the last gunner in the line falls. The men in front don't look back. The cacophony of the battle and their own muzzle flashes mask the sound of their comrades' collapse. Another shot, the next man down. York is breathing steadily, his hands as still as the Tennessee limestone. Bullets from other German positions are shredding the trees around him, the air snapping with the heat of passing lead. But he doesn't flinch. He fires 28 times. 28 shots. 28 hits. One by one. The guns that had just erased half of his patrol go silent, not because of a massive bombardment, but because of a single man applying the mathematics of a mountain hunter to the machinery of modern war. On the ridge above, Major Paul Vollmer has seen enough. Vollmer is no coward. He is a decorated officer who has survived 4 years of the most soul-crushing warfare history has ever devised. He has endured gas attacks, creeping barrages, and the meat grinder of the Western Front. But what he is witnessing right now defies his reality. A single American soldier is dismantling an entire machine gun battalion with the casual grace of a man shooting targets at a county fair. Vollmer decides to end the anomaly himself. He draws his Luger, fixes his bayonet, and screams an order to 6 of his best men. They rise as one. A wall of gray uniforms and jagged steel, charging downhill through the brush directly at York. It is the logical move, the only move. A man with a bolt-action rifle cannot stop 7 soldiers charging at close range. By the time he reloads once, they will be upon him. York sees them coming. He doesn't fumble. He doesn't panic. He sets his rifle down in the mud and draws his M1911 semi-automatic pistol. The mathematics of the Tennessee mountains return to him in an instant. Just like the turkeys, and just like the machine gunners, he starts from the back. The last man in the charging line goes down. Then the next from the back. Then the next. York works his way forward through the charging squad, his pistol barking in a steady, lethal rhythm. Because he kills from the rear, the men in the lead have no idea their support has vanished. They keep running, thinking their brothers are right behind them, until suddenly there is no one left. 6 shots, 6 men down. Vollmer skids to a halt, his boots sliding in the blood-slicked leaves. He looks behind him and sees only bodies. He looks in front of him and sees a lone Tennessee farmer with a smoking pistol pointed directly at his heart. The silence that follows is louder than any explosion. In that moment, the German major realizes he isn't fighting a soldier, he is fighting a force of nature. Major Paul Vollmer does something that surprises even York. He doesn't reach for another weapon, and he doesn't try to flee. He looks at the bodies of his men, then back at the lone American, and simply offers to surrender. Not just himself, but everyone. Every German soldier still hiding in the trenches and foxholes on that hill. York, still breathing heavily, his hands slick with sweat and grime, responds in the only German phrase he managed to learn. Comrade, surrender. One by one, they emerge from the shadows of the Argonne. It is a haunting, rhythmic procession. York stands by the ridge, his eyes counting them as they descend into the valley below. 10, 20, 50. The numbers keep climbing until the valley is choked with field gray uniforms. 100, 132. For a moment, the war stops. There is no gunfire, only the sound of 132 pairs of boots crunching on dead leaves. Later, when the world called him a hero, York would say he felt no pride in this moment. He felt only a profound sense of relief, not because he had won, but because the killing had finally stopped. He had kept his deal with God. Every single one of those 132 men was alive because Vollmer chose to stop, and York chose to let him. But the battle wasn't over. They were still deep in enemy territory, with 132 prisoners who outnumbered the surviving Americans 20-1. York understood the danger instinctively. He placed Vollmer at the very front of the column, right next to him. He pressed the muzzle of his rifle into the major's back, a silent but clear message. As long as the lead animal moved, the flock would follow. They began the 7-kilometer trek back to the American lines, navigating by instinct through a forest that was still crawling with German patrols, with York holding the life of an entire battalion in his shaking hands. The war ended for the world in November, but for Alvin York, a different kind of battle was just beginning. He returned to a country desperate for a hero to make sense of the carnage, and they chose him. Within days, his name was in every barber shop and diner from Nashville to New York City. He was promoted to sergeant, awarded the Medal of Honor, and paraded through the streets of Manhattan under a blizzard of ticker tape. But the hero the public wanted wasn't the man York was. Hollywood came knocking with suitcases of cash, offering him more money than 1,000 years of farming could produce, just for the rights to his face. He said no. They offered more. He said no again. He didn't want the spotlight. He wanted the silence of Pall Mall. He returned to his mother's table, looked at his hands, and chose to use them for building instead of destroying. He took every cent he eventually earned from his story and built a school for the children of the mountains, kids who, like him, had more talent than opportunity. He spent the rest of his life as a farmer and a teacher, living the quiet life he had begged God to keep on that Tuesday morning in October. History remembers Sergeant York as the greatest soldier of the Great War, but if you had asked him, he would have told you his greatest victory wasn't the 132 men he captured. It was the fact that he went into the fire a pacifist and came home exactly the same man. He had stood in the center of the world's most violent storm and refused to let it change his soul. That is the part they don't make movies about.